Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to The Caring Economy with me, Toby Usnick. Today, I have for the first time two guests at once. I've not done this before, but it's a fantastic husband and wife duo, and I'm going to give you a quick intro. We have Itto Outini and her husband, Mekiya Outini. Itto is an international journalist, a Fulbright scholar, something we both share in common, a human rights activist, accessibility advocate, and author of the forthcoming memoir, Blindness is My Light of Life. She holds an MA in journalism and a strategic media from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville, and has practiced print and radio journalism in the US and Morocco, and she has been invited to speak for organizations including Caltech University, Verizon Wireless, and North Seattle College. She has a most incredible story about how she was rendered blind by a family member. We'll talk about that today. Mekiya, her husband, is a writer and author and co-founder of the DateKeepers, which is an international media platform. He has earned his MFA in fiction from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. I think we have a sense of where they met. In short stories and essays and poems, and they have appeared in outlets such as the Chautauqua Literary Journal, the Michigan Quarterly Review, and Willow Springs. Welcome to The Caring Economy, Itto and Mekiya.
Thanks.
Thank you. And I'm excited to share my story as well as our experience and work with your audience. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Itto. Tell us a little bit about your life story, because it's quite shocking if I'm honest. But you've certainly made incredible success out of your challenges.
Yeah. Hello again, everyone. My name is Itto Outini. I am totally blind. My story is very, very, very long. I'll try to summarize it as much as I can. Yeah, well, I am 34, but it feels like I've lived 3,400 years. But I was born and raised in the Atlas Mountains of Morocco, in the middle of nowhere, with no access to technology, electricity, or running water. Basically nothing. I was taught to take care of animals and clean and cook, and I didn't have access to education. I lost both of my parents. They died when I was very young, and I had to move from house to house with my family members. They were not really loving and or wanting to have me with them. I started losing my left eye because of glaucoma at a certain age. I will get into that, why I didn't know my age at the time. And then when I was in my early teenage years, I moved to my mother's side, and I saw my cousins going to school and neighbors, and I felt really sad because I wanted to go to school, and there was no one was interested in taking me to school, and I didn't really know how to do it myself. I was just a teenager person from the mountains coming to the small villages. That was a huge upgrade. So it was like, wow, coming from a place where like everyone knows everyone to a place where it's village, and there was people from different groups and different backgrounds. So when I was 17, I was attacked and blinded by a family member and was left in the hospital. I was abandoned by my entire family, and I ended up becoming homeless, which lasted 6 years. In Morocco. It was tough, but there were people who supported me all the way. I would say I am now an international journalist and a successful businesswoman, and that's thanks to everyone, specifically individuals who have invested in me. And during those 6 years of homelessness, I had dreams. All of those dreams come true. I had a dream to go to Miami. Just that one was a fun dream while I was reading. I had a dream to work for the UN, and I did work for the UN. I had a dream to become a journalist and go to the US. So all of those dreams have come true. I had to work so hard. In my last year of high school, I was rescued by an American couple and I was no longer homeless. They helped me secure an apartment, go to the American Language Center where I learned English. So, and again, another taxi driver told me about the Fulbright program. Of course, a taxi driver who didn't know really what the office is. He just said, "Oh, I saw foreigners going in and out. Do you think I should drop you there?" And I was like, yeah, whatever. I was looking for any opportunity. And I was in my last year in college. And I remember I met an executive director of the Fulbright office back in Morocco who retired that year, actually, during my cohort, Dr. James Miller, whom I consider like a father figure to me. And I told him my story and I said, I've been struggling and I want to continue my education, get a master's degree in journalism. And that's how I got a lot of support from the Fulbright office. From even before I came to the US, they helped me with everything, even bringing me to the airport in Casablanca in Morocco. So that was really like the first. Fulbright was the first organization that believed in me and and supported my dreams and believed that I actually will accomplish what I promised to accomplish, which is things that we will go into later. Yeah. But yeah, I was awarded the Fulbright in 2017 to the University of Arkansas, which is, of course, where J. William Fulbright, the founder, the Arkansas senator and the founder of the Fulbright program, studied and lived there, and found out that later his mother also was a journalist. And it was a wonderful time in Fayetteville, Arkansas. Not only that I met my best friend at the time, who is my husband now, but my other friends and my American host parents who have been supportive for the last almost 6 years since I landed in the US.
Wow, awesome. I want to ask you about becoming blind and how one transitions through life. But instead, why don't let's go to your husband first and get his little overview and how he made his way to the University of Arkansas and then to you.
Sure. Okay. So I was born and raised in North Carolina, and I was born in Raleigh. I was raised most of my life in Asheville, which is where my parents still live. And just a quick aside, but Asheville is in the Appalachian Mountains, as a lot of people probably know. And about 200 million years ago, when the continents that we currently think of as Africa and Asia and Europe and North America all were connected, the mountain range that is now mostly in North America called the Appalachian Mountain Range, it had some bits of it broke off when those continents split apart, and the northern end of that chain ended up in Ireland and the British Isles, and the southern end ended up in Northwest Africa in Morocco. So we're actually, if you go back far enough, we're actually from the same mountains.
I love that.
We found that out last year, and we were kind of tickled by that.
If you go back to Pangea, you were one, and now you're back.
Yeah, exactly. You have to go back a little ways.
I like that.
And the ranges that were part of it. It's all part of the same range. My parents both had gone to school for architecture, but neither one of them had ever worked as an architect. They both are very hands-on, craft-oriented people, and they actually deconstructed and rebuilt their own house while we were living in it. It was a 900 square foot house, and so I was constantly surrounded by sort of it was never fully finished when I was living in it. And I did not inherit that hands-on aptitude. There's a story that my father tells that I don't actually remember, but according to him, when I was young, I picked up a hammer by the wrong end and I started trying to hit hammer nails with it, and I thought that was how it worked. I have no recollection of this, so I can.
Became a writer instead.
As far as I'm concerned, there's plausible deniability. But even though I didn't inherit that hands-on aptitude, I did inherit the perspective of a craftsperson. And I knew that I wanted to be a writer from a very young age. And I approached stories as it's abstract in that you're not actually handling physical materials, but I approach stories as something that you build and deconstruct and reconstruct. And I knew from a very early age that that was what I wanted to do. And I've ended up in the business world with Itto kind of by accident, because I was never passionate about entrepreneurship for its own sake, but I have been passionate about stories for a very long time. And as it turns out, telling stories takes work, and compensating people for their work involves, you have to figure out how to do that. And that's what we're doing at the DateKeepers, and we'll get into that later, is we're trying to make sure that our writers are compensated for their work. Because there is a lot of labor that goes into telling a good story. Absolutely. So I went to school for creative writing in Wilmington, North Carolina, and then for grad school I went to the University of Arkansas, which is indeed where we met. And by that point I was feeling a bit like the discursive environment that I was in was rather insular, and culturally the environment I was in was rather insular, and I really wanted to get a more global perspective. And I had studied abroad in India when I was in undergrad. So while I was in grad school, I figured out how to get myself to India for 3 weeks. And then I went on a trip to Ghana for 3 weeks, and I went to Egypt for 3 weeks. And I was just trying to get a sense of what is going on in the rest of the world, and how people, like what sorts of stories people are telling, and how and why. And I also was pretty deeply involved in the international community in Fayetteville, Arkansas, there was a language school that also ran other sorts of programs for Fulbright scholars and other international students. And I worked for them as a cultural ambassador and driver for quite a while I was in grad school. And that was where our paths first crossed, actually. We met, I think, the second day you were in the United States.
But I forgot about it.
Yeah, she forgot about it. We didn't actually become friends
for anniversary
until thereafter. Of course, I didn't forget about it because I heard the highlights of her story, and you can't forget that.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I graduated in 2019 with my MFA in fiction, and we were good friends by that point. And the pandemic came along shortly thereafter. I had started working in a grocery store because I was not, I needed a break from grad school, and I needed time to write, which meant that I needed a job that didn't suck away all my mental energy. So I took a job at a grocery store. I started working on a novel, and then the pandemic came along. And I quit my job, and for the next year and a half or so, I lived on mostly on beans, which actually is still how we live, although no longer for financial reasons. Now we live on beans because we like them and they're really healthy. And I spent that time writing the novel, and during that time, we went from being friends to being in a relationship. And then I ended up moving to live with Itto in Kansas City, and here we are.
And are you now married?
Yes, we're married.
Yes, congratulations. So I love the whole story, and it's international, and it's romantic, and it's purpose driven. Itto, take us back. Help my listeners, if you would, my audience, understand what a person who is blinded, how one comes out of that. You make it look like it was easy, but I can't imagine it was. So can you give us a little bit of context or the story there?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy. It's been a while, but also there were different things that were harder than being blinded. There was the fact that I was neglected by my family and never was loved. There was the fact that I had to struggle financially and face, cold hunger and all of that. So those, I think, were taking more of my energy than, being blind. But of course, blindness also was hard for, I think, the first few weeks or few months. But education has powered me, and it replaced the sight, and it replaced everything. I fall in love with reading, writing, journalism, storytelling. Of course, I was raised in an oral storytelling traditional way of stories. I just fall in love with journalism and technology. I remember my science teacher gifted me a portable cassette radio, which I fall in love with that. And I knew what I wanted to do. And as I said, dreams that I had to work for the UN and to go to the US. And that made me not forget that I am blind. I don't, of course, forget that I'm blind because I am blind, but just get more, be motivated to do things. And I had a lot of good things that I focused on. I was too distracted to focus on the negative parts of my blindness.
Mhm.
And then later, I am a very I am a person who I focus a lot on how people talk, what people say. Like, it's easy for me to find out someone's way of thinking or behaving just through their words, right? Like, I don't really have to see their face. That's not important.
Mhm.
And one time I was in the bus, and of course I have that in my forthcoming memoir. It's the first chapter of the book. I went to an organization that took advantage of me and my story. And I talked, and they promised to pay me to do everything. And then later, I ended up finding myself in a big city where I had no idea how to navigate it. Not only that I was blind, but it was my first time in a big city in Morocco, Casablanca. And on the bus, I thought of those people who worked there and how they were fighting over who's going to take what and shares and all of that. And I thought of myself and how much I overcame already by that time. And that's actually how the title of my memoir came to my mind. Blindness is the light of my life. It doesn't, like, I don't feel like blindness has deprived me of anything. It actually has given me
Mhm.
the power to easily know what people's intentions are.
You know more blind people than I do. Within the larger blind community, do you have a sense of how your experience is similar or dissimilar to others? I mean, do people share your optimism and that can-do spirit, or is it very idiosyncratic?
I really can say, because I know a few blind people, but I think our lives shape us to do what we do and be who we are. And actually, last year, while working on my memoir, I read 365 memoirs, and I couldn't find any memoir that is even a little bit closer to mine, right? The first book I read was by Dave Pilzer, A Child Called It, that, of course, he was abused by his own mother. For me, my parents died, so I don't really know what it means to have parents. But I can't say that, all blind people are like me, or all
Sure.
blind people are different. I think, again, it's an individual thing. But I haven't met any person who has overcome what I have overcome, which is great. I hope that there's,
Great. It's an original story. Of course. It's a great story.
yeah.
Technically, what does one have to do? Like, when you're in Morocco, rural Morocco, you're blinded. There's not, I would imagine you're not going to find Braille books in the library, if you even find a library. So how did you, was it just basically survival instincts initially, just finding your way to get food and water? And then how did you make your way to getting educated in the formal sense?
I had to ask people and go around until I found myself in a city, big city. And then, like, as I said, a taxi driver took me to the blind school, and that's how I ended up at school. Of course, during my time, I think now things have changed, of course, but even during my time, people, like blind people who could afford technology, they had it. There were people with, their parents, their families, those who were financially good to do that. But for me, I didn't have I barely got the money to eat and drink. Like, I even relied on people on the street to give me food and all of that. So, but during my middle school and high school, I didn't start school from the first grade, thankfully. I got my education in a span of 6 years instead of 12 years. Yay. So I didn't need much. The teachers, we had Braille papers, and they dictate, and we typed the notes and lessons and all of that. But I would go to shops, grocery shop or clothes shop or whatever, and ask someone to read out loud to me, and I'll be typing with my Braille typewriter. And I did that throughout my university. I had no technology. the first time I was introduced to technology was back in 2017 when I came here to the States.
Wow, that's amazing. Mekiya, how do we get to DateKeepers? Tell me what this is, because it seems to be part of your shared purpose and what you two are doing together.
We co-founded it together, and it is a media platform. It's both a family business and an international media platform. And our mission is to tell stories that are not being told by other media outlets. And we're in the habit of saying by the mainstream media or the legacy media, but it's really not just that. We're trying to tell stories that even are not getting told in the alternate media space, because, and the main reason for that is because we are resistant to telling stories that fit an ideological arc. And we want to tell stories that are determined by the lives of the people who've lived them. So right now, we have a few different types of stories that are showing up on our platform. We are interviewing prominent people with disabilities and advocates and allies around the world, and we're branching out from that as well. But we're just interviewing people in different countries around the world who are doing interesting work and overcoming extraordinary challenges in order to do that work and to put it out into the world, and often are not getting the attention that they deserve. And we are profiling them. We also have guest writers who are sending us op-eds, investigative journalism, essays, different things along the way. And as I said, we are making sure to compensate them because we understand that labor goes into that. And we are also writing and publishing personal essays that deal with snapshots of our own experience and connect our condensed sections of our narrative and connect them to insights or lessons that we've learned from those. And trying not to do it in a, this is what you've learned, like this is a just so story sort of way, but in a more organic way so that the reader can understand what insight we might have gained from that, but also maybe the reader gains some other insight from reading that same piece. And so all of these, at this point, I would say it's 3 different genres, but they're all kind of weaving together into a meta narrative, which is the evolving narrative of the DateKeepers. By the way, the name DateKeepers is the English translation of our last name, which I took from Itto. I was born Mekiya Walters, but that was actually my mother's maiden name. It was her maiden name because she did not take my father's last name when she was married, and so I got my mother's last name, and then I took my wife's last name. And Outini means the one who keeps the dates, and the dates in this case is the fruit of the date palm tree. It's not the date on the calendar. Although in English, the pun actually, like, it works both ways because we do have really full calendars. So we're keeping both types of dates, but we also have dates in the fridge. And so that's where the name comes from. And it's just the English translation of our name. And we're trying to create a space where stories can be told without having to conform to the ideological pressures, which is actually really challenging, because as soon as you start to push back against one ideology, you find that you're starting to fall into the hands of its equal and opposite ideology on the other side of the political spectrum, or whatever spectrum that ideology is on. So it's really a challenge to resist that temptation in both directions. But that's the main thing we're trying to do, is to tell the stories of individuals who are doing extraordinary work, living extraordinary lives, and are not getting the attention that they deserve.
Yeah, and avoid being charged with being woke, right? Because that's the political part that people could say you're being very
well, any ideology. Woke is, we don't want to be woke, but we also don't want to be regressive. We don't and it's easy to fall into one of those traps or the other.
So,
and I think I'm well trained on that, because with my story, sometimes it's all like it's hard for me to tell it. And as a matter of fact, like if I get, if a journalist reaches out to me, I always say, especially if it's a written, I would love to see the final, the final piece, because like one time they added, like they put that I started school for the first time at the age of 27, and then I was homeless for 17 years, and basically that made me 50 something years, and I was just 28. I was like, wow.
So what's the business model? Is it become a platform and then you do public speaking and that's where you build your profit, or is it through subscription model, or how does DateKeeper work?
It's through subscription model. I am planning to host some webinars where I will be talking about different things, but yeah, for the DateKeepers, it's a subscription model. I don't like to go with advertisements because as a blind person, using a screen reader to navigate advertisements is very challenging.
Ladies and gentlemen, again today on the Caring Economy, we have the dynamic duo, Mr. and Mrs. Outini. Itto, who was blinded at a very young age by a family member, no less, in Morocco, and her husband, Mekiya, who she met at graduate school, are talking about their advocacy today. Do you find that there are certain brands that are helpful or supportive or understanding of blindness, just to focus on one aspect of a disability? Are there certain corporations you'd like to give a shout out to?
Grateful to Microsoft. Microsoft is very user friendly to not only blind people like myself, but very inclusive for other groups of minorities and people with disabilities. Mm-hmm. And there's an app that it's called Be My Eyes. And the Be My Eyes app is a 24/7 millions of volunteers, where basically I can use my phone and call a volunteer to read anything if I wanted to, and if my husband isn't here, or if it's I'm an early bird, if it's like a 5 or 4 a.m. and I don't really want to wake him up. So but also Microsoft, they have Microsoft LinkedIn and Microsoft Help. So how it works is, for example, I am working on my LinkedIn and there's a visual content and I need help. I called them and we do a screen share through Quick Assist. That way, the Microsoft Quick Assist person will see what's going on my screen and help me navigate it. Because if, for example, buttons or pictures are not labeled or forms, or there's no way for me as a screen reader to do it, and Microsoft's accessibility helpline or help through Be My Eyes help me overcome those challenges.
So your advocacy is for disabilities writ large. Blindness comes to mind because you're blind, but are there certain disabilities that are more prevalent in your advocacy, or anything that you might want to educate us about in terms of how you advocate for different groups?
I don't want to be selective and have a certain group of people. I want to tell untold stories, and those of people who, want to tell their story to educate our readers. And I don't have any certain type of disabilities, because as I said, even within disabilities, for example, blindness, there are a lot of type of blindness. People who are visually impaired, there are people who can see light. For example, for me, I don't even have a light perception. I have prosthetic eyes. They're eyes that the doctors made. So I don't have any vision. So I use, for example, screen reader. But there are a lot of disabilities out there that I myself I'm still learning. The challenges that different people face, there are visible and invisible disabilities. There are people with multiple disabilities. According to the World Health Organization, the at least 15% of people worldwide identify as people with disabilities. That's a huge number.
If one of our listeners, say a corporate person, wants to consult with you or bring you in as a speaker or as a consultant, what's the best way to be in touch with you?
We both offer a lot of services, and anyone can whether reach out to us through our website, which is thedatekeepers.com, or through LinkedIn.
So, final thoughts, pearls of wisdom. What pearl of wisdom might you have, Mekiya, in your career, and what you might suggest to young people or even older people who are looking for a pivot, perhaps?
Well, there's that old adage, if you do what you love, the money will follow. And I don't think it's quite that simple. There's plenty of opportunities for the money to get sidetracked and lost along the way. But I do think that's on the right track, because if you're doing what you love, then you have a better chance. And if you're doing something that you hate or you're miserable, and even if the money then shows up, it doesn't make any difference, because at that point you're already miserable and your life doesn't have that sense of meaning to it. So do what you love. Try to figure out how to make that self-sustaining. And as an extension of that, there are a lot of people who want you to listen to them. Listen to the people who earn your trust. So I always listen first to Itto because she and I have established that trust, and we always listen first to like the work that we're doing and the mandates of that work and the people whose stories we're trying to put out into the world, because that's where we have found that there's a source to be trusted, and that circle can widen as time goes on. But don't just listen to anybody's advice or what people seem to want you to do. Listen to the people who earn your trust.
And also, if you do what you love, then no matter what happens, you're not going to have regrets.
I agree with everything that Mekiya said. And also, if you do what you love, it's not only that you gain a lot from it, but it's easier. It's like you're playing instead of working. Work hard. I don't believe in anything else, and ask for help, especially, for someone like myself who is, a person with disability or an orphan or someone who they're not connected with anyone biologically. There are people out there, and I would say to the listeners, despite of everything that they read about me and they heard the things that I overcame, and the challenges that I had to go through, I have seen in my life good people way more than bad people. There are bad people out there, but there are a lot of good people that will support us to do what we love and get rid of fear and anxiety and things that, self-doubt, and just do the things that you think you are passionate about and you love.
That is so awesome. It's infectious. Ladies and gentlemen, again, I want to thank today our guests, Itto Outini and Mekiya Outini. They are both international advocates for the disabled, particularly as a blind woman, Itto for blind folks. And check out their organization. It's called DateKeepers.com, and see some additional or alternative types of storytelling. I hope you both come back and tell us about the launch of your memoir, Itto.
Yes, thank you.